the book of Mark, chapter 5. We're going to jump right back in to the Gospel of Mark, which we've been studying, reading, thinking about, and looking at for a number of weeks now. And I know a number of weeks is on the short side. It's been a bit. But as we have, don't forget that Mark is communicating most likely Peter's story, and he's communicating a perspective on Christ that shows him to be a humble servant. And we will see, and we have seen Jesus in one way or another serving everyone around him. But don't forget that as he's doing that, he's not doing that void of power or without authority. It actually makes his humble service all the more significant when you understand that he's also all-powerful and he's still fully God, and he exercises authority in his teaching, which the people recognized. He exercises authority over the elements, which his disciples recognized, right? Even in serving them, he exercises authority, and people noticed it, recognized it, and were, in one sense, I think this is a good term, bewildered by it. Like, this is wild, and it's amazing, and it's unbelievable, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it all. But Mark continues to communicate Peter's story, so at the end of it, we will be challenged to know what to do with it all, which would be, just so you know, spoiler alert, bow the knee, accept him, have faith in him, and see him for all that he is. And if Mark says, look, I'm going to present to you Jesus as the humble servant, his willingness to humbly serve, even though he maintained all authority and all power, and he is the name that is above all names, right? Doesn't it make that service even more significant? And, shall I say, challenging? Because no matter who we are or who we are not, who we think we are and who we really are not, it doesn't matter. If God himself, through his Son, humbled himself to serve humanity, then how much more should we, right? This is one of the big overarching themes that we should get out of the book of Mark. But we're in chapter 5, and if you want, you can find verse 21 and read along with me. We'll pick it up this way. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. And he pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see, the people were crowding against you," his disciples said, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Now, while Jesus was speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" And overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and he said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead but asleep." But they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Girl, I say to you, get up." Are you guys laughing because I didn't read that? You guys are rude. Immediately, I'm kidding, you're not rude. You just can't help yourself. Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around, and she was 12 years old. At this, They were completely astonished, and he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for your word. Lord, I thank you that we have something significant to talk about, Lord, to learn. And I pray that you would reveal yourself to us in a way that helps us and in a way that captures our attention. Lord, in a way that encourages us and draws faith from us. I pray that you would be honored and glorified even as we consider who you are. In Jesus' name, we're glad you're a good, good Father. Amen? Amen. Pretty, if you will, well-known story in the Gospels. It's not just Mark who records it. It's recorded by Luke and Matthew as well, and it's a pretty well-known story. We all know it, right? Jesus comes back from the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Remember, before this, a number of weeks ago, he had traveled over to the other side, the non-believing Gentile side, where he had been met by a number of men. We're told about one in Mark, but there was most likely more than one, who had been possessed or demonized or tortured and tormented. And he goes over there, I suggest specifically, to heal and touch, so that everybody would know that Jesus is not just the humble servant just for the Jewish nation, but he's for the humble servant for all of humanity. And remember, he comes back. Before he comes back, the man who had been healed says, hey, let me go with you. And Jesus says, no, go back to your town and your village and you tell everybody about who I am and what has happened. And he'll do that, and we'll come back to that side of the Sea of Galilee soon, and we'll see that his quote-unquote little witnessing and missionary journeys went really well because people from all over the region would come back and want to know more about him, even though at that point they sent him away in fear. Well, he comes back to the other side, most likely to Capernaum again, and he's met by a large crowd. On the one hand, I've been thinking about this for a while because I've read this story a bunch, I've taught this story a bunch, and I've been thinking about it, and I realize, like, God reveals himself through this story as the God who's willing to be bothered. You know that? Like, he's willing to be bothered. If you just read through it, sometimes we forget that Jesus is being interrupted at every turn, right? He comes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He's just done this whirlwind missionary journey, this ministry trip where he's calming storms and he's casting out demons and he's having fun with pigs, and all these things happen, right? Like, it's a full meal ministry thing. There's all kinds of things. It's full gospel, you could say. There's all kinds of things going on. And he comes back, either he needs a break, he wants a break, or he's got more stuff going on. But when he comes back, he's interrupted by another large crowd, which, by the way, we always look at them and we think, wow, the crowds, they just wanted to be by Jesus. Yeah, so they could get something from him. Because that was the extent of their understanding. You could say that that was the extent of their faith at that time, which is a good thing for us to realize, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I struggle because I know that I have imperfect faith. And I wonder, is that okay, God? And we'll see that it is. So he's interrupted by a crowd, and when he sees the crowd, whatever his agenda was, he starts teaching them and caring for them and ministering to them. Why? He's a humble servant. Like, even his day planner or agenda isn't above and beyond the things. I mean, literally, he's Jesus. You guys, I don't have time for this right now. I've got a world to save. Right? Right? On the one hand, we know that's true, but he engages the crowd that's gone out to him every single time. He begins to teach them, and out of the crowd comes a desperate father. His name is Jairus. We know that, right? We're told. We're also told that he was a synagogue leader. Now, it's important to understand that a little bit. He was not necessarily a priest of the synagogue. He wasn't necessarily the spiritual leader of the synagogue. Remember, synagogues were Jewish community centers where Jewish people could gather and do all number of things, including spiritual services, including reading the scrolls, including practicing the prayers, and so on and so forth. Synagogues most likely originated during the Babylonian captivity, where there was no temple. It had been destroyed in Jerusalem. They've been exiled into who knows who where, right? Who knows who where, right? It's Dr. Seuss Day. It's okay. They've been exiled up there, and they don't know, like, right? All that they knew in terms of spirituality was taken away from them. So they devised this plan. Wherever there was a certain number of Jewish men, they could gather in that area and practice their prayers and read their scriptures and encourage one another and so on, and have birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and all of those things, right? Jairus was a synagogue ruler or leader, meaning he's the guy that probably coordinated the events that happened in that synagogue. What's important for that is for us to understand that he was a person. He was a Jewish man, and he had influence. He was important. For all intents and purposes, people would have looked at him and said, this guy has done everything right. Are you with me? However, his daughter is sick. She's 12 years old. The language could communicate not only it's his only daughter, but it may be his only child. She's 12 years old, and she's going to die. He's afraid that she's going to die. Are you with me? Now, in that day, it's important for us to understand, in that day, this messes up everybody's ideas about sickness and hurt and pain and struggle, because it was easy then to think that somebody is sick or somebody is struggling or somebody is struck with some sort of misfortune because they haven't been leading a proper life as it related to the gospel, as it related to the Mosaic law, as it related to relating to God. And all of a sudden you have this guy that everybody would have looked at and said everything is good with him. Like, it's got to be good with him. He's in charge of one of God's little buildings. That came out funnier than I thought. I didn't mean it as a joke, but that's funny, right? He's in charge of one of God's little buildings. So obviously God's happy with him and everything is good. And yet he's struck with some sort of circumstance that makes him desperate. And so he hears that this Jesus guy is back on the scene. He's come back from the other side of the lake, right? He survived everything that happened over there, and he's come back up from the other side of the lake, and he goes out to him. Now, we read it. We're like, of course Jairus went. We've been told that since we were in Sunday school, and we saw the stories on the, flannel graph, whiteboard, movies, skits, whatever. We've seen it. Of course that's what happens. But it's important for us to step beyond all of that and realize this is a Jewish leader coming to Jesus. In this moment, the only reason that Jewish leader would come to Jesus is because everything else has not worked. He's desperate. Nothing else is working. And I don't know if he's the Messiah or not. And I know most of my cohort, right? Most of my other peeps, most of my posse, most of my friends, most of my community actually has decided, even my overseers have decided that he must die because he's working according to the power of the devil. Are you with me? Right? I don't know about all of that. I don't care about all of that. All I know is everything that I hear is this guy touches people and they get better. I got to go talk to him. Why? Well, because here's the thing. You can have all your religious ducks in a row, and as soon as calamity strikes your family or you personally, don't you know that sometimes those ducks actually really get aligned? People are more important than religious programs, right? Let me say it again. I'll go even further. People are more important than places, right? People are more important than even this building. There was a memorial here yesterday, just on the side note. There was a memorial here yesterday, a celebration of life. And with that, these days comes receptions and lots of food, which, by the way, you guys, this church, you people, this community, you guys are awesome and amazing. Because you just care for people. You can get a phone call or an email from a meal train that says people are hurting and struggling, and you'll throw caution to the wind, may not even know them personally, rearrange your Saturday schedule, come down here, work your fingers to the bone. I saw some of you. Your faces were flush. It was warm. There was lots going on. There were a lot of people here, and you just served. Why? Because we're beginning to understand that people are more important than our programs. And when people are suffering, don't you know that a lot of times programs just kind of go out the window, or they get put in their proper place. So whether his people believed in Jesus or not, it didn't matter to him because his daughter was hurting. And I don't know where else to turn, and he's here. His 12-year-old daughter. So he goes to Jesus and he says, please, can you help? Please, can you do something? Please, I don't know how, when, what, where, but please. And the Bible tells us, without even saying a word, it just says, and Jesus went with him. However, if you're the dad, what happens next is a little disconcerting. Because what happens next is he's held up by the crowd. Like he's on the way to Jairus' house. And we read this all the time, right? But we just kind of skim over it. Why? Because it's in our Bible reading plan. We got a whole nother day to live, and let's get on with it. Get it out of the way. Check it off our to-do list so we can move on with life, right? I got music to listen to, jobs to do, people to see, and Darrin said people are more important. So we got all these things to do. But when we do, we often miss the details. And the details are this. They're going to Jesus is going with him to his house, and the crowd keeps crushing around them. Now, we read it, and we're like, yeah, because there's going to be a lady in there who's going to go, right? Okay? But if you're Jairus, and you're desperate, and time is of the essence, this crowd is absolutely not only annoying, but problematic, because they're holding up this walk. They're holding up timing. They're wasting minutes. So on the way, we're told, in the story, we're told of another woman. Ironically, how old was Jairus' daughter? Okay, so we're told of a woman who was bleeding. There was something wrong with her. She had an issue. And how long does it say that she had the issue? 12 years. Interesting, I think. So she's bleeding for 12 years. The 12 years simply represents 12 years of suffering. It also represents a very different 12 years, if you're contrasting. Jairus, a man of influence and affluence, has a 12-year-old daughter, and for the longest time, everything was happy, and then all of a sudden, in 12 minutes, it's not anymore, right? On the other side of the contrast is this woman who's been suffering while other people are celebrating and living and enjoying life. You have a woman who's been suffering. Now, it's not their fault. This is just the two different dynamics. She's been suffering for 12 years, suffering to the point of exhaustion, depression, frustration, and all the other shun words you can think about, even being shunned, by the way. 12 years. The scripture tells us that she had spent all that she had to have doctors help her, and she didn't get better, she only got worse. She only got worse. Ironically, the law, in Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the law actually prescribes what to do in these things, like you can't be around people. If she was married, Denise and I talked about this earlier in the week, if she was married, she was most likely at this point divorced. Like literally, we know this, historically, Jewish men would divorce their wives because they didn't prepare the food right, and they'd go and get a certificate of divorce and go, that's it, I'm over that. Can you imagine 12 years? By the way, that's not God's heart and intention. Okay? But can you imagine 12 years of suffering? Bankruptcy. She spent all the money she had. She got no more money. She's hopeless beyond hopeless. Not only does she not have any money and no hope to get better, but she also has no friends and no family because everybody would have ostracized. Everybody would have pushed her out to the margins. Jesus, the humble servant, I don't know if you keep noticing a theme. He continually goes out and he affects the people on the margins. In the margins, those who have been pushed out of the mainstream of life and said, no, I'm going to actually give you life back. You know the story. We just read it. So she goes to Jesus, and in her mind she thinks, listen, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, maybe I'll get healed. Maybe this superstitious, magical thought could work. There were instances, by the way, in their history where people would go up and touch the clothes of a spiritual healer and they'd get better. And so she thinks, well, that's who Jesus is. She doesn't recognize that he's Jesus, Lord of all. She doesn't recognize that he's Jesus, the very representation of God who's a good Father. All she recognizes is here's this guy who's spiritual and healing people, and maybe I can get help. I got nowhere else to turn, and nothing else has worked. I was doing some research on this morning. The Talmud, which is the Jewish, just so you know, the Talmud is like a Jewish commentary, both orally and then prayerfully, a Jewish commentary on the Mosaic Law, okay? So basically, they take the Mosaic Law, and then they write all kinds of words about it and thoughts and ideas, and this is what it looks like, and this is how it works. And when it comes to the law about people who are bleeding, when it comes to these kinds of situations, they wrote down all kinds of interesting healings. One of which that I found was really interesting. I checked it out. It's actually true. One of which was this, that you would tell the person who was suffering that they needed to go and pick a barley kernel. Are you with me? From a barley plant? No. It's weird. You go get a barley kernel from the droppings of a white female donkey. It's in the Talmud. You get a barley kernel from the droppings of a white female donkey, and you carry it around, and your flux, your situation, your circumstances will go away. 12 years, man, of these kinds of ideas, right? 12 years of maybe you should have more faith. 12 years of maybe you should have tried this. Maybe you just didn't believe enough. Maybe you shouldn't. And you know what? It's actually annoying now because you keep coming back here, and you know I can't be around you because you're bleeding. And I'm really sorry, but clearly you're a sinner beyond repair, and I'm not quite sure what to do with you anymore. Could you just leave me alone and stop coming? And by the way, I'm connecting that to the fact that you don't have any more money to pay me. Hopefully that describes a little bit more of the mindset of this poor, suffering lady. So she thinks, man, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, and she does. Like, she makes her way through the crowd. I have no idea how that happened. They would have known who she was. I don't know if it was just the commotion of recognizing that something significant's happening with Jesus, so they're just celebrating. I don't know. But she sneaks her way. She finds her way. She gets away. And she touches his cloak, and she knows it's done. I'm better. She knows immediately, like, whoop. I don't, wrong sound effect, but she knows immediately she's better. And she walks away because that's all she needed, right? That's all she wanted. Don't you know, here's the interesting thing, don't you know that God recognizes not just what we want, but what we need? She may have wanted just healing so she can go away and figure out what life might look like now, right? Even just the next moment. Maybe it wasn't, well, now I can finally get a job and I can buy a bigger clay hut thing with a deck on the top that people might tear through to get to Jesus or something, right? She doesn't think like that. Like, in her mind, she's like, if I can just touch him, I'm all better. You know what? I have relief right now in this next few minutes. I'm just going to enjoy the next 30 seconds without worrying and struggling and hurting and being shamed and being put aside. I'm going to actually go to the market and I'm going to buy a mandrake. It was a biblical fruit. I don't know. I just threw it out there. I'm going to go to the market. I'm going to buy an orange. I'm going to get a grape. And I'm going to actually buy it eye to eye, face to face, and touch somebody as I give them the well, I'll pay you Tuesday for the great mandate today type of a situation. She didn't have any money, right? Like, her whole life is back. Everything. She can go to the market. She can go to synagogue. She can go hang out with family members again. They may not believe it, right? But she's sneaking away going, I don't know how I'm going to convince them, but, like, I'm not bleeding anymore, so I'm better. But Jesus, here's the interesting thing. Jesus knows that while that's what she wants, what she really needs is to know that God loves her. What she really needs to know is that even her imperfect faith that may have been selfish and self-centered and focused, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense because, by the way, that's how all of our faith is, right? I don't know about you, but when I came to Jesus because I didn't want to go to hell. Right? Like, that's selfish. I came to Jesus because I got issues and I don't want these issues anymore. And apparently I've been told there's a really big issue waiting for me if I die. Right? Gnashing and burning and all of the biblical descriptions of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I did this. I don't know about you guys, but I did this while I was going to church. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't believe in Jesus, but I'm 18 years old sitting in a Bible study where somebody talks about weeping and gnashing of teeth. I understand weeping, so I did this while he's doing his Bible study. For like, I got 5 minutes in me, and I was like, forever? Right? So when there was a moment of like, hey, you come to Jesus, he'll make, like, it really was, I'm going to come to Jesus because I don't want that anymore. I'm going to come to Jesus because I don't want to suffer like that anymore. I'm going to come to Jesus because I don't want to do that anymore. Just so you know, all of our faith was imperfect at the beginning, wasn't it? Like, unless it was like, you know, I'm going to come to Jesus so that I can selflessly, sacrificially be a part of his world mission plan to bring help and healing to the entire universe forevermore and take all that was wrong that happened in the garden, make it right again in the new millennium. Somebody baptize me. Right? We don't come to Jesus like that. We don't. We come to Jesus with, like I've heard it said, we come to Jesus warts and all, which is a weird saying. When I was 6th grade, I had warts all over my hand, and it was disgusting. And I think, well, no, I didn't come to Jesus like that. I mean, comb my hair. Right? I got all dressed up. I didn't. White shorts and a gray Nike tank top. Hey, Jesus, I need you. Well, you might want to change your clothes. That didn't happen. I said, okay, I love you. Thanks, James. So that's the point, right? God knows. So what does Jesus do? He stops it. It says this. Hold on. Who just touched me? If you guys remember, there's a crowd, right? Pressing in around him. We're not talking about like American church crowds where you give space, right? You don't even sit next to each other. No judgment, just an observation, right? Right? We don't even do that. We got all kinds of like the front row, by the way, they're the greatest seats in the church. No one ever uses them unless you're a junior high and you want to fall asleep during second service so your parents can't see you from the back, thinking somehow that I don't notice it. Right? We're not talking about an American church crowd pressing in on you where there's space and appropriateness and, a recognition and respect my space, right? We're talking about an ancient Near Eastern not like Americans crowds. And they are, even to this day, rude. Pressing in is touching and pressing in. And he says in that context where he had been touched by no doubt hundreds of people, if not thousands, he says, somebody touched me. Who was it? The disciples, they're like, what, really, Jesus? Which is funny. I think one of the other side notes as you read the scriptures is you'll notice that Jesus is always putting his disciples in places where they say dumb things. And what I mean by that is they teach the Lord and Savior. Well, Jesus, obviously you missed the idea here. I'm going to state the obvious for you. There's a whole crowd of people, and everybody's touching you. Maybe you do need a break, right? But that's not what's going on. Somebody touched me. Not only did you read the words, for I know that power just left from me. Just so you know, he knows it because he did it. That wasn't like some oops accidental thing that mysteriously leaked out of his aura. Are you with me? This is something he did. He's in control of this whole thing. So somebody touched me. Who is it? And finally, the woman is like this. Goes and falls at his feet, terrified that she's going to get in trouble. Because there's procedures and programs and a place for this sort of thing. And she just made a mess of it all. I think it would just be horrible to live under that kind of oppression. I honestly do. I think it would be horrible to be a hurting person, to be invited to a place where the people in that place make the place and the programs surrounding the place more important than the people that the place was built to help. That'd be terrible. Dirty up the carpet, it cleans up. And if it doesn't clean up, we'll replace it and trust God to provide. Now, some of you are like, ooh, hold on now. That's not why I give my tithes and offerings. Well, I got news for you. You don't give tithes and offerings to the carpet. You give tithes and offerings as an offering, as a respect, as a recognition of God. Give those things to him, right? There are people, and they need to be cared for. And Jesus calls her out, and he looks at her while she's terrified. Maybe he'll take it back. Maybe he'll send me away. He looks at her, and he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. If you do some Bible research, some gospel reading, you'll find out this is the first time and probably the only time he looks at a woman and he says, daughter. It's a term of endearment. It's a term that would have made her recognize that even though she's been treated like a wicked stepchild by everybody else around her, that she doesn't belong. It's a term that would communicate to her that my Father loves you and you're okay. And I want you to know that your faith has made you well. Have you ever wondered that? Why did he call her out? Couldn't he just lovingly just let her go off and whatever? Well, sometimes, right, public displays and public realities of faith have to be done. And it's not so that God knows, right? It's for her and everybody else around her. Like in that moment, daughter, your faith has made you well, go in peace. Now everybody around knew, oh, something changed. We can't treat her like we used to treat her because she's well again. And even our Mosaic law says that when they're made well, they're back. Are you with me? So in doing so, it's this incredibly loving and gracious thing that God does. He says, you're well. It's all okay. And everybody needs to know that. But even more personally and poignantly and importantly and intimately, she needed to know it. She needed to know that not only is she okay physically, but that God loved her relationally. Daughter, your faith, yeah, that part of you that believed superstitiously, that part of you that believed maybe even a little self-centeredly, that part of you that didn't believe perfectly, that part of you who believed that maybe you could sidestep our programs and procedures, that part of you that believed somehow imperfect and undeveloped and probably even immature as it was, has made you well. The faith of a mustard seed, Jesus would say later, can do amazing things. And she exercised it, and Jesus valued it. He recognized it. He appropriated it. He gave mention to it. That was a little preachy. But he does. And everybody would have known, and she's made well. Now, don't forget, there's this moment where it's like, woo, gosh, this really is amazing. He really does crazy, amazing things with unbelieving, demonized people, with storms that we can't even predict. They settle down. He's doing all these amazing things. Jairus, in this moment, though he would have been irritated because it's taking too much time, took me 15 minutes, can you imagine? Took too much time to communicate and to walk through. Jairus, on the one hand, is probably going, come on now, her faith has made her well. Go in peace. Now, can we? And so they do go. He would have also, though, at the same time been encouraged because, yeah, I really have put all my eggs in the right basket. It really is this guy. And so they start to go again, and there's a messenger that comes from the house that says, don't bother him anymore. She died. Don't bother him anymore. She's no longer living. And the death, right, over and supersedes any of God's abilities, or especially Jesus' power. Like he can calm the raging sea and he can exorcise the demon, but he can't resurrect. Just so you know, were you here last week? Right? Spoiler alert, yes he can. So Jesus overhears it, right? He overhears them saying, don't bother him anymore. Remember that I said that one of the cool things that God reveals about himself is that he's willing to be bothered with that which is bothering us. So he overhears them saying, don't even bother him anymore. It's beyond hope. Jairus, in a moment, I actually can't imagine it. And to be completely honest, I don't want to imagine it. I have friends that have gone through it, but there's a part of me that is unwilling to even try to imagine it because it's too horrific to think about. Is that fair? That's wherever that is, that's where Jairus is. And Jesus overhears them and says, hey, Jairus, let's go. Don't you believe? Don't fear. Just believe. Just believe what? He's asking Jairus to believe what would have been impossible. He's asking Jairus to believe that not only can he let the evidence of his ability to calm storms and deliver demons and all of those things, he's asking Jairus to believe that he can even resurrect someone from the prison of death. That's unbelievable. To you and I, it's a Bible story. We read it and we're like, yeah, he did. There's probably a Sunday school song that we could sing, right? Something about this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Don't hide it under a bushel or even death. I'm going to let it shine. You probably shouldn't teach that song to little kids. Not like that, right? So they go to the house. They hear the mourners. You know the rest of the story. And he goes to the little girl and he says, daughter, arise. And she lives. She lives. You have this contrasting picture. An affluent man and his near-dead daughter who would end up not living anymore and then living again. And you have this woman who was ostracized and pushed out and uncared for, and they both find healing and love and wholeness and hope at the command of Jesus. That's what they both find. The common thing that they did have, the one thing they did have in common besides 12 years, are you with me? The one thing they did have in common that Jesus calls out in both of them is their faith. Woman, your faith has made you well. Jairus, just believe. See, I think part of the reason that it's here is that not only we would be okay and recognize that God is willing to be bothered by us and that we're not actually a bother to him, but when we bother with him, we have to do so by faith. We have to do so by faith. Turn in your Bibles, if you will. We've just got a few minutes. Turn to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. And in verse 6 it says this, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." See, the challenge for us is to recognize, wait a minute, God can be bothered by me. I can interrupt, like, whatever it is that he's got going on, holding all things together, according to Colossians, right? I can interrupt him. I can barge right in. I can talk to him. But when we do, we have to do so by faith. This is the common link for both of these stories, is they moved by faith. I've already made the point. It wasn't necessarily perfect faith. It was mustard seed faith, which actually paves the way for all of us, no matter what we're facing. We have to move by faith. But first, if we're going to move by faith, we got to kind of understand faith. I wrote down on my little piece of paper, I wrote down hey, we got to get faith. And I'm not talking about go to some place where we can make an exchange and get a commodity called faith. You can't drive through a faith store, if you will, and say, I'll take 2 orders of faith and supersized belief. And they're going to say, okay, that'll be $4.99, please. And you're going to be like, yeah, that's a good deal. And could I have it in 2 minutes? Right? Hot and ready. Man, I want McDonald's again. Right? It doesn't work like that. When I say get faith, I mean understand faith. We have to get it. We have to understand. We have to understand that faith is the commodity. Faith is the language. Faith is the love language that God communicates and works with. And we have to get that. We have to understand it. What is faith? Well, some of us could say, well, I just have faith. But people don't really have faith. You know what I'm saying? People have I hopes. That's a lot of times what people have. Faith is something altogether different. Faith isn't just, well, maybe. Faith is, I believe. Back up just a few verses in Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1. He says this, the writer of Hebrews says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for." And I encourage you have homework today. Go and read the rest of Hebrews chapter 11 and you'll hear, by faith, this person did this, and by faith, this person did this, and by faith, this person did this. By faith meaning not just, I'm going to have faith. Not that. Not even a George Michael singing about it, faith. We're talking, some of you get it. We're talking about faith, like the confident assurance and hope for what we don't see how it can work. And that confidence and that hope is just, it's not just like, I hope this works. It's not that. It's a confidence and hope in none other than Jesus Christ, the all-powerful Son of God, who is actually okay with us coming to him, even with little teeny imperfect faith. I believe, but help my unbelief, another father would say to him. And Jesus would say, okay, let's get it figured out. And he does, right? We got to get faith. That's one of the first and foremost things. Faith isn't a bumper sticker, and it's not a post on Twitter. Faith goes more than just saying something. Faith is actually moving and breathing and living. Faith is this. It says, you know what? I'm going to get up and I'm going to breathe again today, even if it feels like today won't change and it's going to be just as bad as yesterday, but I'm not going to quit. That's what faith is. Not because I think it'll just get better, but I think it's because God will meet me there and he'll do something there. Faith is believing in God and not giving up no matter what the circumstances are. And when we get faith, we actually begin to grow in faith. Does that make sense? Because when we start to believe that and have confidence and hope in a God who can bring peace to that which seems unpeaceable, hope where there's hopelessness, right? Healing where nobody else could help, right? We actually believe that God is able to do that. When we actually take the word for its word, we actually believe, hey, he can calm the storms, right? We actually start moving like that, then we begin to actually grow in faith. We actually reconsider our circumstances. Now, I want to be very careful here. This is, I think we have to be passionate about this, but respectfully so. We actually then reconsider our circumstances. We actually see that maybe some of the negative things are happening around me are not just a bummer, but an opportunity for me to grow in my trust in God. Yeah? I know it would be better if I could say, well, maybe the reality of God is that our negative circumstances, he can just make them go, poof, that's what I was trying to do. Make them go away. But it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes we go through seasons and struggles and circumstances that are very, very, very difficult. And instead of rocking our faith, they should actually build our faith. Why? Because we believe that God can work all things together for his good to those who love him and are called according to his purposes. That's faith. Now, does that mean we never have bad moments? No, we have them, right? We can struggle and we can be honest about it. But man, they should make us grow in faith. I remember when I was youth pastoring, there was this girl in our youth group. She's now married and has a couple of kids and is doing fantastic. But she had a hero of hers who died unexpectedly from a heart attack at 33 years old. That'll mess up a 19-year-old girl's faith really fast. And I remember she came to the church and she wanted to meet with me and talk to me. And of course, as a young youth pastor, you're like, well, I get to help a kid today for the glory of God. Right? Because I'm thinking that maybe she wants to know how to get on to the next season in her life. She had just gotten back from some Bible school stuff in Hawaii and could help her with that. And she sits down and she begins to tell the story of her friend who had passed away tragically and unexpectedly. And then she said this, Darrin, I don't understand God. I prayed for his healing and he died. So over the years, run into her now and again. A number of years ago, I ran into her again, saw her little kids, they're cute as can be. And we started talking a little bit. And she said this, she has since learned and grown in faith to believe that her prayers were answered, that her friend was healed. That side of heaven, not this one. She believed that. I was challenged by it at first, like, whoa, come on. No, but it's actually true. There was that kind of faith to believe that maybe even our tough circumstances can actually be the very things that help us grow in faith, that we would actually walk by faith. 2 Corinthians, there's not enough time, and that's my fault, not yours. I'm a self-aware man. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Man, Paul writes some amazing things through the whole chapter. 21 verses of amazing things that encourage us to walk by faith, a faith that longs to be at home with him. In the first part, verses 1 through 10 of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says, hey, remember that what we have right now is temporal, but we're holding out for something eternal. And so we walk by faith knowing that, you know what, this is not the end. The struggles and the tough times, the circumstances are not the end of my story. My story actually ends up here in heaven with him. This is what Paul communicates in 2 Corinthians, that we walk by faith and the kind of faith that longs to be at home with him. That will motivate and change the way we do everything, by the way. It'll change the way we spend money. It'll change the way we treat people. It will change everything. We walk by faith with a faith that longs and lives to represent him. In verses 11 through 15, he says, look, if anyone's in Christ, right, he's a new creation, right? The old is gone, and behold, the new has come. And now we have been called his representatives, his ambassadors. We long to live with a faith that not only longs to be with him, but in the meantime is willing and able and honored to represent him. And then finally in chapter 5, verses 16 through 21, we would walk with a faith that actually sees others through him. Paul will say in 2 Corinthians, he says, so therefore we no longer consider each other the way we used to. We no longer just see each other in the flesh and without faith. Now we see each other by faith, right? Which means this, we believe with the very work of God, in God, we believe that Jesus in you is going to do something amazing. Which means this, it changes the way we interact with each other, right? Now we're not going to look at each other and go, I can't believe Trevor did that. I cannot believe that he took a big rubber ball, and he plastered this junior high boy right upside the head with it during a junior high game. Pretty fun. No, we don't high five that. The rest of the story is the junior high boy is like, oh, that was awesome, do it again. They're not the brightest creatures. But it's a faith that believes, like we now look at each other and we don't just call out everybody's bad stuff. We're actually believing for the best in one another, right? Even in questionable things, we trust God. Yeah, but I trust the Lord in one another. This is what Paul says. Can you imagine how different our lives would be if we actually walked by the same faith that Jairus practiced and the unnamed woman practiced? If we actually walked by that kind of faith that changed our actions because we know that this is not our home, I'm going to enjoy life abundantly, but I know that life forevermore is not here, how that would change us? Can you believe, what would it look like if we actually lived with and walked with the kind of faith that was willing to represent him in all that we say and do? Not just like, hey, Jesus bumper sticker on our car. I'm not talking, that's great, but there's more. God did all of this. Jesus said it's finished, not just that we might put a bumper sticker on our car, but our lives might be lived in such a way that he's lived out loud, and then people see, right? Can you imagine that? Or how about if we actually just began to look at one another and everybody else through the eyes of Christ? And yeah, maybe they're going through a tough time, and yeah, maybe they did something stupid. I would trust that you look at me and I do something dumb. You have to do it every Sunday, by the way. I'm not the model of perfect communication up here. And yet you got to look at me and you got to believe, right? What do you guys do? You come back every Sunday, don't you? You come back every Sunday and you're like, we're going to listen, and this is probably not right to do, but my back hurts and I don't have a stool. Every Sunday, you come here and you put up with the shenanigans. I say things that maybe I shouldn't. I say words that they're not even words. And you smile. And I'm assuming the best in all of us. You do so because you believe that Jesus is doing something in me. Well, I got news for you. This thing's not about me. This is about us. What if we all looked at everybody like that? Not just the pastor who preaches, but everybody. What if we looked at everybody with the lenses, the loving, gracious, kind, empathetic, passionate lenses of Jesus? How would that change the way we interact, not only with each other in here, but the world out there? Could it, would it, should it change everything? I suggest it should. Those two people, when they walked away from this moment, we're not told a whole lot. But you better believe it changed everything for them. Everything. We can walk by this kind of faith because Christ died and he rose again that we might have new life.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information about Rogue Valley Christian Church, visit our website at www.rvchristian.com.